Welcome to Chatting GPT, the podcast where I talk to interesting humans who are implementing AI. I'm your host, Maryrose Lyons of the AI Institute, and today I have the great honour and pleasure of having Christopher S. Penn, the renowned marketing expert, digital marketing, data analytics, AI, everything, on as a guest. And the reason he's here is actually testament to what my mother talks about in terms of if you don't ask, you don't get. And Chris put a really interesting video out on YouTube about 2 or 3 weeks ago about how to optimize for LLMs. I'm a huge fan of Chris's videos. I don't know, Chris, if you realize this, but I first heard you speaking at Social Media Marketing World in 2017. And you had a smallish room because the subject of AI wasn't quite so hot as it is today. And that is where your speech and your talk then really opened my mind to the place we're all in today. So every Sunday morning since 2017, you beam into my phone or my laptop and I go really deep. There's only two people I listen to religiously. It's yourself and do you know Azim Asnar, Exponential View?
I know the name, yes.
Yes, well, the two of you, you're my Sunday mornings. So it's a great pleasure to have you on the show today, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So what I wanted to ask you, I very quickly took up your offer of you had said that one of the ways, which we will talk to in a moment, of making sure that your brand or your personal brand or your company name appears within the training data of the models is to make sure that you're spread as widely as possible. And you said, for example, be a guest on podcasts. If anyone wants me to be a guest on a podcast, just ask. So I stopped what I was doing and I was delighted when he came back to say yes. So let's have a little chat through, if you want to just share, first of all, the overall kind of thesis of, what we need to do differently to be ranked in the LLMs versus, say, to be ranked Google style SEO.
So that's a great question. Let's start with the fact that there is no such thing as ranking in language models. It does not exist, and there's no way to measure your brand's strength and presence because the way a language model works, it is filled with statistical interconnections between words, phrases, and concepts, about 10 trillion words. To give you a sense of how much knowledge that is a bookshelf of plain text books that stretches around the equator of the planet twice.
Wow.
That's how much knowledge is used to train a language model. In there somewhere is your brand and your company and things like that. Now, the question is, what exactly is in there? Well, what's in there is statistical associations of what your brand name or your company or you has been seen near in text, because things like word order matter. So if I talk about Trust Insights or Christopher Penn, those phrases in enough text around the internet will become associated. If I also talk about generative AI or I talk about data science, and
You're doing it now.
exactly in proximity to those concepts, in time, you build small statistical associations so that when someone says to a tool like ChatGPT, I kind of wonder, what's it like to try and do uplift modeling for public relations? I'm not familiar with this. Can you explain it to me? That query is taken apart by the model. It is turned into those same mathematical associations, and then the model behind the scenes tries to figure out what is mathematically similar to the input. And there's a very, very long, involved, in-depth process of how this happens that would probably be a show unto itself. But what comes out is statistical associations, which are then decoded back into words, and that is what ChatGPT displays on screen. And so there is an infinite number of ways that I could ask about, say, Maryrose Lyons. Like, who is Maryrose Lyons? What does she do? Where is she based? What are the topics on her podcast? And this is why you can't do ranking in search in language models where you can in search engines, because there's an infinite number of ways of having the conversation, including in the middle of a conversation. So there may be, I have seen people's ChatGPT sessions where they just bounce from topic to topic. How do I make a recipe for banana souffle? How do I do this? Who's Maryrose Lyons? All right. And You can't measure that. There is no way to measure an infinite language. But what you can do is influence these models by having as much raw data out on the web as possible. For example, very recently, Meta got in a whole bunch of trouble for using the LiveGen pirated books library that has it's a pirated archive of books and academic papers, and they got in a lot of trouble for using that to train one of their models. Well, my books are in there, and I'm not terribly upset about this because, again, it's more text about me, but there obviously are creators who are very upset about it, rightfully so. Meta used their intellectual property without permission, but it puts those words and phrases and concepts into the language model, and then when people use it, they're more likely to find you for the things you talk about.
So the goal is to try and be mentioned as many times as possible within a model, so that the likelihood is that your name will bubble up.
That's correct. You want to be as many places as you possibly can be, and in as many formats as you can be. At a bare minimum, if you do nothing else, do YouTube videos, because YouTube, A, you can specify who's allowed to train on your videos, and B, because it's multimodal, every big model maker is trying to grab YouTube videos, get them transcribed or download the captions files, and then use that to train language, but also image models and video models.
Yes, we found actually on our website when we started repurposing our video content into long form text. So I set up an automation and it picks up, it makes a transcript, writes a beautiful blog post, and then put it over to the site. That's when our brand new website started getting picked up and started ranking. So that, that kind of content repurposing out of one mode into another is really liked. But just on the Google side of things, the first piece of advice of yours that I followed was, after turning on my advanced settings to make sure that YouTube could actually take that my YouTube channel could actually take AI bots. First of all, I followed your instructions to set up a view on Google Analytics, just to kind of keep an eye on what kind of traffic we're getting. So just to kind of preface this whole conversation here, you and I are very switched on to, we need to be on the models. But when you look at like the data on, the number of people who are using, let's say, Perplexity and ChatGPT versus Google, it's still tiny days. It's still teeny tiny numbers. But it's good to have those reports, I think, set up so you can start getting a flavor of how much traffic is coming in.
There's an asterisk on that. So that traffic that you see in Google Analytics has to be invoked by the Google Analytics tracking code. So if a user who's using ChatGPT is looking around and saying, I need to find a marketing expert of some kind, and they bring up Christopher Penn's name, if they don't click on the links that are provided in the sources, as a user, I won't see that. So if the intern for a company, right, is saying, I need a short list of keynote speakers for our internal company event, ChatGPT, show me some keynote speakers who know about marketing AI. And my name's there, and they just jot that down. They don't click on anything. There is no record of it.
Yeah.
There's no record, including when ChatGPT's crawler goes to my site. It is not going to invoke the tracking code for Google Analytics, because it's just going to grab the raw HTML from the server. So you'll see that in your server logs, but you will not see that in Google Analytics. So there is the potential for there to be, I would call it like shadow traffic, if you will, of people who will become aware of you and your brand through a language model. But it's like they had a conversation with a coworker. You have no clickstream record of it. And the only way you'll detect that is with things like uplift modeling.
Uplift modeling. Tell me more about that.
Uplift modeling is a classical statistical technique where over time you would specify periods of things that you've done, and then you have all the ongoing activity that you're normally doing, social media posts, Google ads, emails, etc. And it's a statistical technique that says, for a defined period of time where something has happened, you denoise your traffic by the things are commonplace from all the rest of your data but in the period of time before the thing was happening. And the delta between those two data sets is the uplift. Now, typically this is done with campaigns. So you run a big campaign, maybe you speak at a big conference, and for 7 days after the conference, you want to see, did it have an impact on the attendees? especially if you had no call to action. Well, you could do uplift modeling on that period compared to previous periods, maybe the 28 days beforehand, and say, what's the difference between these two periods on a channel by channel basis to see, did being on stage at an event actually make a difference or not?
But then people like you would have a kind of a more advanced level problem, which is that when you're in keynote season and you do so many keynotes, it's like, how do I separate one from another? Because you're a very in-demand speaker, aren't you?
I am, however, people have short attention spans and they have short memories. And so if the events are like 4 or 5 days apart, the first 3 days after an event, so the day the event ends, people go home. The next 2 or 3 working days, if they're going to do something, they'll probably do it in that period.
Right. Okay. Yeah. True. And then they'll follow up with you. One of the other tips you had, which I thought was great, was, well, I thought it was great, and I had to teach myself how to set it up. Was using, like you casually say with all your technical skills, just use W3M just to see how accessible your site actually is and how it looks to somebody, say, with site difficulties. So explain what you meant by this, and then I'll tell you about my experience of getting it set up.
So generally speaking, all crawlers of any kind have a budget. They have a certain amount of time they're allowed to spend on any given website before they move on. If your website, if you use a text-only browser like Lynx or W3M, or you use a screen reader, which is something that like a visually impaired person would use, and you go to a website and you've got 23 pages of navigation and ads and crap to scroll through before you get to the content, that's a miserable experience for people who are using text browsers or screen readers. And so that's approximately 10% of the population. So you're pissing off 10% of your audience right off the bat. And B, with search engines and AI crawlers, they may be like, okay, I grabbed the first 10 kilobytes of data from this page. Let's move on to the next page. And none of your content made it in because it's all your menus. A great example of this is CNN's website. If you go to CNN's website and the screen reader is like scroll, 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 scroll. Oh. Where's the content? Scroll, scroll, scroll. And what you want to do is you want to have your most important content up front. So, for example, on any piece of content that is long form, have a summary chunk up front that contains the key concepts, so that if the crawler comes by and says, I'm going to grab the first 10 kilobytes, well, it may not grab all 45 minutes of the conversation, but it will grab the summary with the highlighted concepts first and understand, oh, that's what this page is about.
Is it okay to put that at the bottom, the knowledge block at the bottom of the article, or does it have to be right up top of the page?
If you're trying to get the summary contents in, it has to be as early on the page as possible. Because again, if you were to cut the page by, like take a pair of scissors and cut the top third of the page off, what's in that top third of the page?
The old-fashioned above the fold.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Well, I actually went down a little rabbit hole of getting ChatGPT to teach me how to install W3M, and I got a bit stuck on my PC, but luckily it was an absolute pleasure and a dream doing it over a Mac environment. So that was really great. Tell us about lm.txt files, because I found this one particularly easy to implement, and I felt I was winning at this point.
So LLMs.txt is a standard proposed by Anthropic, who makes the Claude series of models, and Anthropic's Claude does look for them. So for the people of your user base who use Claude, that's the thing. And essentially, it's just a text summary in the markdown format of what your site overall is about, in the same way that robots.txt tells a crawler where it should and should not go on your site. LLMs.txt tells a language model, here's what this site is about. So you want to have that be a robust representation of your site. And the way to do this, at a bare minimum, is to ask a deep research tool, what is my site about?
Yes.
However, the better way to do it would be to actually take the entire contents of your site, if possible, or at least the most important pages, put that into a language model and say, build this markdown file, a structure that has an about us, who we are, what we have for sale, and then what are the major pieces of content, and then all of the relevant links, so that when, for example, Claude, which now has web search enabled, can go to your website, you can say, here's what ChristopherSpenn.com is about. Here's what TrustInsights.ai is about. I don't have to go everywhere else because I have it all in one handy package.
Yes. Actually, incidentally, do you have any idea why Anthropic took so long to add web search?
Anthropic is an interesting company in that they're very much like Apple in that they try to get it right rather than get it fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what you've seen is Anthropic's models on almost all benchmarks are near the top of the charts for coding, for math, for logic and reasoning. And they take a while because they try to get it right. Whereas a company like OpenAI throws stuff out there, which is great. However, then for the 3 days after it, all of their services are unusable because they're all crashing and timing out because nobody stress tested them. And Anthropic, because of that, can be a little more resource effective. One of the things that you've probably seen in the last couple of months is when a competitor releases a big thing, like DeepSeek releasing the second version of its model yesterday, everybody else kind of scrambles. And when you scramble and get hasty, you kind of make a lot of mistakes. And that is something that Anthropic tends not to do.
Correct. Yeah, and they're great, and we love them for it. Okay, another question for you. One of the things you had said was, apart from like say yes on YouTube, absolutely, and if you're on something like Kit, make sure it's turned on to public. All that stuff was really good. What about the idea of producing kind of question and answer format text on the page? My question to you is that, is this supposed to be something that you do as a kind of a given on every single blog post you put out, and therefore would Google not be penalizing you for more or less duplicating content?
You're not duplicating content if it's on the individual piece of content, right? So if I put up a blog post about making synthetic scrambled eggs, presumably the frequently asked questions on it would not be the same as on how to configure YouTube transcripts. The questions and answers are key value pairs. And so models, as they're trying to build training data sets, are going to naturally build that. And the reason this is important right now is that one of the things that model makers are doing a lot of is using synthetic data to train future generations of their models. So DeepSeek v3.2 was trained on the reasoning outputs of DeepSeek R1. Llama 3.3 from Meta was trained on synthetic data engineered for Llama 3.1405b. And what that means is when a base foundation model has to generate training data, a lot of the times it will be in key value pairs. And if your data is already pre-formatted like that, it will help a model understand, here's a question, here's an answer, here's a question, here's an answer. When I generate the next training data set, I don't have to work as hard to create the question, create the answer. And if you have intentionally seeded the questions and answers with your brand and stuff like that, it will help format that, and hopefully make it into the synthetic training data sets.
That is a very good answer. I will be linking in the show notes to your YouTube video where you go into even more depth on this, but you're so clear at making a point. Couple of rapid fire ones before we go. Do you have a WordPress plugin you'd recommend for adding schema markup?
I use Rank Math for a lot of my SEO stuff. I pay for the pro version.
Great. Okay, cool. Also, I'll be putting in a link to, you did the video about like all your different tech stack. That was so great. It was like somebody opening their drawers and saying, "Look, do you want to have a look around?" It was fantastic. So saying yes on YouTube. Posting everywhere on social. I think that's a really, really good point. Again, it's about volume. We had made the decision as a company that we weren't going to post so much anymore on Instagram and Facebook. We kind of made this decision after the announcement that they were going to not have fact checking. And that kind of thing we felt it was going to change. But as soon as I listened to that video, I came in on the Monday morning, and on our content scheduler, turned it back on. So now we're posting automatically on Facebook and LinkedIn. Sorry, Facebook and Instagram. We do LinkedIn anyway. What are your thoughts on, say, TikTok?
So TikTok powers ByteDance. ByteDance has its own language model. So they just released Ernie 4.5. So Baidu builds their own. So essentially, here's the thing. For every social network, there's probably a corresponding model. So LinkedIn feeds Microsoft. Microsoft feeds OpenAI. Instagram, Threads, and Facebook all feed Meta, which makes the Llama series of models. X feeds the Grok 3 model, which is by xAI. And as much as I absolutely despise the owner of xAI and of X in general, and I think that he's a horrible human being, I have to post stuff there to make sure that it is in the training data so that A, I'm there, but B, I also post a lot of political stuff on there to make sure that my point of view is represented, because if you just leave, all it leaves behind is a big sea of garbage, and then that model that people start using, whether or not they use the service itself, is influenced. So every major model maker has some kind of hook into a social platform of some kind, because it's a good source of training data. So you have to decide whose models do you want to be in, and then how are you going to participate and show up in those places to influence them.
Well, here's a question, okay? So, social network that has absolutely risen to the fore in recent years is Reddit. Reddit is everywhere. Okay, so you were saying obviously start posting on Reddit if you want to be picked up in places. My question here is fearfully, okay, how do I go into Reddit and start posting and not get absolutely slayed for being a marketer, ruining their lovely spaces?
It's like being a part of any community. Show up and be helpful. So go into communities that you know something about and answer people's questions. And you don't have to, pimp yourself all the time. But if you are in a community and you know the answer to a question, or someone has an open feedback thread, put it in there. And as has been the case in social media for the last 20 years, put on asbestos clothing, because you will get flamed, and you probably just have to get used to sitting in fire.
Okay, and my second to last question, with Quora, the question and answers. Does anyone feed off Quora? Is it worth it? Because that's an easy one to kind of get yourself on.
Quora, ask.com, justanswer.com, all of those places. If you have the capacity to be there, be there. Those companies in particular are licensing their data sets to AI companies. So if you can be there, be there.
Okay, fantastic. Well, my last question is, you were saying that we should all put ourselves out to be the best podcast guests we can possibly be. So just in answer to that question, do you want to give us the statement that we should all be using when we are appearing as guests that will really help to feed the models with the information that you need? What kind of information should you be dropping in throughout?
Well, here's the thing. If you are on a podcast and you're talking about you and yourself, you can occasionally reference yourself, as I have throughout this episode, and your company name, but also have useful information that will be of service to the audience. Because as much as we want to influence AI models, we are also creating content for humans at the same time. So if you just spew nonsense, no one will enjoy that. You shouldn't. At the end of the day, you still have to provide value to the humans that will ultimately be at the end of the technology chain. So whatever it is that you can do that is different than what other people are talking about in some fashion. When we talk about, for example, transformers models and encoders and decoders and attention matrices and softmax layers and all the techno stuff, guess what? If you go on LinkedIn and you look at every other AI expert on there, how many of them understand how an embedding works? How many of them can talk about how text is tokenized and embedded and fed to an attention layer in a model? And if you know that, you can explain to somebody, here's why stuff at the front of your prompt matters more than at the back of your prompt. Actually, it's in the middle, technically. But you, as a guest, have to have expertise that nobody else has.
Yes, and you have a lot of expertise, which you have bundled up into some amazing courses. Do you want to mention some of those courses that some of the people might be interested in attending? And also tell us, where are you keynoting this summer?
I'm all over the place. My next one will be at Social Media Marketing World, and then Content Jam, and then Trace One's Industry Conference, a bunch. I have two courses. One is Mastering Prompt Engineering for Marketers, which is the title tells you what it's about. And the second, which I'm just finishing up right now, is called Generative AI Use Cases for Marketers, which is brand new. It will be out soon. You can pre-order it now. But it's the one I'm happiest about, because A, we talk a lot about oatmeal in it, and because I use a synthetic company that I made so I don't violate any NDAs. But B, we give you all of the materials for all the use cases, so you can try every single one out. It's not just sit and nod. It's like, no, you're gonna do it. Dust off your keyboard. You're gonna do this.
I think that's what differentiates, say, the courses that you're offering, the courses we're offering, from, say, some of the more academic ones. It's like fingers on keyboard from the get-go. Learn by doing. It's not about the history of the internet. It's about where we are now and bringing those tools on. I will put links to all of those courses in the show notes. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Chris Penn, Trust Insights. I am such a fan. I will continue listening every Sunday for as long as you do your thing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.